Hello, one and all. It's about time we get back to talking about the lore and story of the Radical-9 saga. We're going to be getting right back into the thick of things, starting with the events beginning in the year 1984. So if you're just tuning in, or it's been a long time since you've seen part 1 of the series, which absolutely fair given its upload date, go check that out and then resume from this point. Last we left off, things were starting to cycle out of control for the George family in upstate New York, which is where we'll be referring to. After Larry and Steven's high school graduation, the George household is left feeling empty as the children embark on their separate paths. Heather is thriving at Yale, living on campus and balancing her studies with an externship at a prestigious law firm in New Haven. Meanwhile, Steven is also living on campus at NYU, but his college experience is darker. He frequently parties, and unbeknownst to his parents, his drug problem is escalating. Larry, the youngest sibling, has taken a different route. Instead of heading to college, he decides to hit the road with his band. Influenced by Cappy, Larry chooses freedom over traditional education, a decision that drives a wedge between him and his father, Gilbert, who had hoped for a more conventional future for his son. Larry's ecstatic about the opportunity to travel and perform with the band Rosewood, which includes Styx, Tommy Boy, Marianne, and Kevin. They tour in an RV, performing gigs that slowly increase in size and reach, helping the band gain a foothold in the music scene, especially in the capital region. As Rosewood begins to find success, they face the challenge of maintaining their unique sound. After a particularly successful show in the city, Styx proposes they evolve their style to incorporate elements from the more popular rock bands, arguing it could help them secure more gigs. Larry firmly opposes the idea, believing in their distinct sound, rooted in melody and funk. It's what makes them special. Tommy Boy recognizes Larry's perspective, but is also worried about their dwindling opportunities for performances. Kevin takes a neutral stance, avoiding involvement in the growing conflict. To Larry's dismay, Marianne sides with Styx, expressing her belief that the band is stagnating. Frustrated, yet understanding the importance of unity, Larry seeks advice from Cappy, who encourages him to compromise. Ultimately, they decide to evolve their sound, rebranding themselves as Hardest Times. Despite this change, tensions continue to simmer. The wedge that would ultimately drive them apart comes on August 23rd of that year. They had a big show, the biggest they'd played in quite some time, for an upscale club who had paid extra for them to play longer than their usual. Larry's world turns upside down when he unexpectedly walks in on his bandmate Styx and Marianne having sex in their RV. This shocking discovery reveals they'd been engaged in an affair since the launch of their band in the city. Moments before their encounter, Marianne had confided in Styx that she was pregnant with his child, igniting a whirlwind of emotions that led them to be intimate right there in the RV. Conflicted about her situation, Marianne isn't sure whether the baby is Styx or Larry's, but she hopes for the former. As Larry processes this betrayal, he feels bewildered that Marianne hadn't ended things with him before pursuing Styx. Overwhelmed by the sight and sound of their intimacy, Larry leaves the RV, abandoning both the band and his former life. He wanders the city streets with Cappy, seeking solace in music and companionship. They find a low-budget hotel called the Sasquatch to crash for the night. Although he has some cash left, it's not enough to sustain him in the long term, and he reflects on how the upcoming show was meant to be their big break. Now it was overshadowed by his departure. The thought of his former band potentially embarrassing themselves without him brings him a bittersweet sense of satisfaction, as he recalls how Hardest Times had always been centered around him. In a twist of fate, though, Larry is recognized in the hotel lobby by Aaron Lowey, a member of a local band called Caraway Hearts. Larry knows of them and has labeled them a drug band, notorious for losing their way due to substance abuse. They strike up a conversation, and Aaron offers Larry a position in Caraway Hearts, having just kicked out their own guitarist for said drug issues. The opportunity is a dream come true for Larry, but it comes with a heavy implication. Larry is haunted by a promise made to his sister Heather after their brother Steven struggles with LSD. She encouraged him to pursue his passion for music, but asked him to stay clean, knowing the temptations of the road. Larry recalls her words, affirming that he wouldn't want to hurt his family, especially seeing how it affected Steven. Larry, against the decision of Cappy, decides to join the band and follow his dream. Larry then wakes up in an unfamiliar hotel room some time after, disoriented, shocked by the chaotic state around him. As fragments of the previous night flood back, he recalls the colorful lights of the club where he performed. The celebration didn't end there. It spilled into the hotel room, transforming into an orgy involving people he barely knew. Amid the wildness, someone had introduced heroin, and he had shot up along with the others. His heart sinks as he examines his arms, seeing the marks left by the drug use. Overwhelmed in shame and fear, he realizes he's alone. His bandmates and the partygoers have left him, taking his belongings with them. In that moment, he remembers he had been conscious during their departure, but his body betrayed him, rendering him unable to move. A chilling thought strikes him. He was having a seizure. The physical stiffness he felt now was an all-encompassing ache. Despair washes over him as he contemplates dying in this room, but he feels something in his pocket. It's the cassette player with the headphones. Reluctantly, he puts them on, hearing the familiar voice of Cappy. Cappy's tone is accusatory, reminding Larry of the advice he ignored about staying away from the band and its influences. "I don't want to hear it right now, Cappy," Larry groans, feeling miserable, but Cappy presses on, stressing the seriousness of the situation. He informs Larry he only has $100 left and suggests he go visit his family, ominously hinting that something terrible has happened. Confused and alarmed, Larry presses for more information, but Cappy remains cryptic, eventually revealing, "They're gonna want you there for the wake." Panic sets in, and Larry processes this news, fearing the worst. He demands to know what has happened, but Cappy refuses to divulge any further details. After an hour of futile questioning, Larry reluctantly gets out of bed, still reeling from the revelation. He confirms the money in his pocket and knows it's all he has left. Stumbling out of the hotel, he makes his way to a nearby car and rental place and spends half of his remaining cash on the cheapest vehicle available. As he drives back home, his mind races with the thoughts of his brother Stephen. He knows Stephen's been partying more than their parents realize. He's filled with dread about the possibility of an overdose. Larry grapples with guilt, feeling hypocritical for judging drug use when he himself was under the influence of heroin. Desperate, he prays that Stephen's okay, hoping against hope he can still find his brother alive. Heather George, 27, has passed away this past weekend from serious injury sustained in a collision with another driver who was under the influence of alcohol and other narcotics. Heather was a cherished daughter to Gilbert and Teresa George. She was finishing her senior year at Yale University and working at the Hobbs & Carlton law firm. The news of her passing is a terrible tragedy for her family, who wishes for prayers in these tough times. Services shall be held on Sunday, September 9th at the Harmony Hill Funeral Home. Larry was unwelcome in his own home. He could feel it plain as day. Happiness was unwelcome in the George home on the day of the news of Heather's death. She was coming home to surprise her parents with a weekend of what was supposed to be good times. She was sideswiped by 30-something who was driving 40 over the speed limit on I-87. He had just lost his job by being drunk on the premises for the last time. He didn't know what to do about the mounting debt he had, so when he emerged onto the highway, absolutely nothing else mattered. Not even the girl who he slammed into. Larry only stayed so long to hear the news before he took off again. It took that long for the reality of the world to fully set in. Heather's death was real. She was gone from this world, and worst of all, he knew his father blamed him for being the surviving child. He wasn't sure what he felt about Stephen, but he was sure there was absolutely no love he would receive from Gilbert George. So, to avoid any conflict for his mother, he skipped out on planning for the wake and started driving in the rental car. He didn't know where he was going, just that it was anywhere but his home. There was no stereo in the car, but it had a cassette player. Larry shook his head and reached into his pocket. He knew the cassette player would be there, and it was. He ejected the tape and slid it into the car's cassette player. "What the fuck did you do?" Larry asked. "You chose not to listen to me. I told you there would be consequences. I am not giving you advice for no reason, Larry. If you would have listened to me, this terrible tragedy would have never happened." "So you're telling me 100% that you're the one who killed my sister? Is that fucking it? This whole time you've been trying to lead me down the right path, but you pull a stunt like that?" "Larry, you are missing the point. I did not kill Heather. If anyone can be blamed, aside from the drunk driver, it was you. You made the choice that led to her death." "So you're blaming me then? Oh, that's just rich. Fuck this. We're done, Cappy. I'm done talking to you." "I would not do that if I were you, Larry. We would not want any more accidents in the George family, now would we?" Is that a threat?" Larry couldn't believe it. All this time he'd kept Cappy close to him and never realized just how manipulative he could have really been. I am only trying to help you, Larry. If you break our pact, then I will have to be forced to get you to comply by any means necessary. Pact? I was 5 years old. I can't legally make any sort of pact or contract or anything like that at 5. Larry, do you assume I live by your rules? You live by the law. It's the fucking law. I do not care about the law. I care about you. I would recommend you not mention this to the police, however. I am more than sure you'll be detained for clinical insanity. Trust me when I say we both do not want that. Larry pulled to the side of the road and threw his head in his hands. What do you want me to do? Just listen to you forever? Is that so bad? Have I told you to do anything that breaks your laws? Have I told you to kill other people? No, Larry. I have been looking out for you from the very beginning. But you were difficult. You live with a rebellion in your heart. You believe it's in rebellion of those who keep you down. But that is not true. You keep yourself down, and you rebel against yourself. Just like when you joined up with that drug den of a band. All I want is to help set you right, to ease your pain. You ease my pain by killing my sister? I will tell you again, Larry. You killed your sister. Your rebellion against yourself pushed those balls into motion. If she were to remain living, then you would not learn your lesson. You would not grow. And that is what you must do now, and I will help you. My next piece of advice is going to require a big sacrifice on your part. But you have to believe that I know what is best for you. What is it? Larry asked, shaking his head. You are going to join the army. Larry signed up for boot camp that very same day. Next, we're going to move ahead to 1986 and meet back with some familiar faces back over in San Diego. In a time that can only be described as a horror movie made real, Alex finds herself outside in harsh winter elements, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions and physical sensations. The cold rain and crunching snow amplify her despair as tears streak past her face, mingling with the blood. Dressed only in light petticoat and a skirt given to her by Noah, she feels woefully unprepared for the freezing weather. Consumed by regret and self-doubt, she berates herself for her previous actions that have led to her current situation, alone and vulnerable on New Year's Day. In a moment of anguish, she screams in frustration and drops to her knees, crying into the snow while cradling something tightly in her hands. The opulent Marshall Manor looms behind her, a stark contrast to her despair. In their heated exchange, Alex suppresses her frustration with their situation, declaring everything feels wrong. She rejects Devin's plea to remain quiet and compliant, insisting that they don't truly belong in this chaotic environment. Her outburst signals her struggle for autonomy and truth in a life that feels increasingly suffocating. This moment encapsulates the emotional turmoil that drives her to the brink. Devin looks away from her. I'm done, he says quietly. What? She says, a hurt look crossing her face. I said I'm done. I'm done trying. I've tried this whole damn time to be your person. I've given up my whole life to grow with you. I helped you go when you were at your worst. Seems like that wasn't worth anything, huh? Alex looks at him with a hurt, confused look. I said go! Get the hell out of this house. I don't want you. I don't want you here anymore. Leave, like you said you never would. Devin, I've been afraid for my life for these past 5 years. You cannot play the guilt card on me, she says, her being replaced by newfound courage. Devin turns around, nearly stumbling over. Listen, go. Just get the hell out of here. I don't need you. Devin, go. Just go, he says, not turning. She turns and walks to the door, but a slight hesitation stops her. She turns around. So, this is it. You're really done? You're just gonna let everything end like this? No matter how much better you think you've gotten since you've come here, you'll always be Noah's bitch, stuffing you like his pig until you learn all of this is a scam. He's breathing heavy now, shaking even. He reaches up and grabs for the cord around his neck, yanking on it until it snaps. The crystal necklace dangles at his side, the shining blue alluringly calling for attention. Nothing but a cunt, he says before his face grows grotesque, and he lobs the necklace at her. She sits in the snow with a bloody nose, broken from the impact, crying her heart out as she clasps the necklace between her fingers. memories of the past flashing through her mind as she wonders where it all went wrong. She stands back to her feet, running farther into the cold winter morning, running and running without end, passing not a single soul. She had no journey, no goal, no life to return to. Her mother and father were both dead, no siblings to speak of, no goals in life to pursue. She was no longer a person. She hadn't been since she stepped foot in Noah Marshall's mansion. She just kept on running. She ran until her feet would allow her to run no longer. She collapsed on that side of the highway as she was slowing near the corner, falling finally into a ditch. She could cry no longer, run no longer, feel no longer. Her whole body ached, and she only wanted it to stop. Alex. She woke to her name being called, moments before death most likely. She knew she was going to die, and now she was hallucinating. There was nobody awake at this time in the morning, not even on the highway. The whole world had become silent to her pain. It is unfair. It was unfair? What had been it specifically? Life? Alex could testify to that. She slowly did what motion she could in her ditch, and she nodded. It is unfair. The voice in her mind was more reassuring this time. It was almost like a soft pillow she were resting on. Yes, she strained. It is unfair. You deserve justice. Justice? Alex asked. Yeah. She feels a warming sensation in her hands. She looks into the crystal, a smile forming on her face. Inside, the crystal looked like a man made out of metal. He offers her warmth, and she decides to take it. She feels her body glow with a magical warmth she'd been missing for a long time. It is a nice transition before her body grows cold for a final time. The crystal, a mysterious artifact kept close since he gave it to Devon when they were young children, would glow for a final time as a sort of light draws from Alex's body. Her skin grows white and she lies silent for good. A body enters the frame. A slender Noah Marshall walks on the side of the highway, getting closer and closer towards Alex. He strolls up right toward her body and bends down, picking up the necklace in his own hands. He pockets it and turns around. He walks back toward the mansion, beginning to whistle a tune with a spring in his step. Now, with those events behind us, we're going to be moving forward 4 years to 1990. 4 years have passed, and Larry is now stationed in Panama under the command of Richard Dick Haddad and First Lieutenant Robert Paz. They have been stationed out by the British Embassy for an act of self-defense against the Panamanian Defense Force. Their mission was codenamed Operation Just Cause. On his very first night out in Panama, Larry wasn't the only soldier that went to his solitary quarters clutching a cassette player. Dick Haddad also had one. It was strange, his cassettes were starting to get old when he was young, so to see them still used by anyone normally was very strange. Larry's mind drifted. He wondered if Dick also had his own guide to listen to, but wrote it off as preposterous. The man was easily twice his own age, so it made sense that he'd stick to what he was comfortable with. Suddenly, the quiet of the night was shattered by the sounds of gunfire, jolting Larry back to reality. It was his watch, and he instinctively began to shout for everyone to form up and prepare for action. The chaos escalated when a fellow soldier accompanying them, is shot and falls to the ground, his life snuffed out in an instant. The sight of the young man's face hauntingly reminds Larry of Heather, making it difficult for him to focus on the immediate danger. Desperate to shake off the painful memories, he takes cover, heart racing. As the night unfolds, Larry and his team, led by Captain Bartholomew Barry Rainwater, work together to defend their camp and repel the attacking rebel forces. The atmosphere is tense, but they manage to regroup and discuss their reasons for being in Panama over a meal. A few days later, Larry and the rest of his squadron are relocated to the Fort Clayton military base, northwest of Balboa. Larry didn't get much of any chance to settle inside the base, as he was immediately invited by Barry, Dick, and Robert for a nice dinner at the nearby Marriott Hotel. Larry asked Cappy in private what he thought of the idea, but Cappy had stopped entertaining irrelevant questions by this point in their relationship. No answer meant Larry was free to decide on his own accord. He agreed, and so the four of them left out in a civilian vehicle. 4 of them dressed in their finest and headed out. Trouble arose along the way when Panamanian civilians, alongside PDF members, ambushed their car, convinced they were armed and dangerous on a recon mission against the PDF. People surrounded the car and hammered on the sides of the windows, demanding they stop and surrender themselves. Larry felt a claustrophobic feeling as all the bodies were packed around the car. One of the PDF soldiers outside opened fire in the sky, which erupted the rest of the bullets to begin flying. One shot pierced the driver's side window and stuck Dick in the shoulder. Another shot, this time from behind, shatters the back windshield and sprays Robert's blood across the back passenger seat. Larry, horrified, leaps up in front and laid into the horn as Dick got control of himself enough to drive out of the panic. The crowd scurried away as they redirected to the Gorgas Army Hospital. Robert died the instant the bullet scattered his brain, but otherwise the group survived with their lives. We then move forward a year as we cross into 1991. Larry was honorably discharged after his time in Panama and returned to America at the start of the new year. He was homeless, but his time in the army provided him with the funds to get himself something small to crash in until he figured out what the next step in his life was. Cappy was silent on the days he returned to the States, so his time was largely spaceless, weightless. He felt like he was floating on nothingness with no way to move forward. Near the end of the month, a letter arrived in the mail from Dick asking for a meetup to discuss some personal matters. Larry didn't want to respond to the letter at first. Seeing Dick would only bring back terrible memories of Robert or every single dead body he'd seen while in Panama. Which would only go further to bring fresh memories of Heather back into his mind, but something inside him urged him to follow up on the meetup. The two went to an upstate New York diner, and the two friends greeted each other as they sat down and ordered a couple of coffees. "Why'd you write?" Larry started off the conversation. "I don't think you want to strike up friendly conversation just said like that." "Sharp as a tack, George," Dick said, and took an apprehensive sip of his coffee. "I haven't been sleeping lately, but not for the obvious reasons. I keep thinking back to that night we were all talking, hours of the night, and you said you felt like you've had a guardian angel. I didn't think much of it then, but I've gone back to that conversation so many times in my mind now, and how you said it, how you believed it, it stuck with me. Made me think you weren't talking about a hypothetical figure." "What do you mean, hypothetical figure?" Dick looked like he was conflicted about sharing, but decided to in the end. "I've seen you eye my Walkman more than once. I thought at first you just klepto eyes, but when I got to know you, I pushed that possibility out of my head. It still seems strange to me. I feel stupid for not realizing it now, but since coming back, I've been thinking, and I finally put two and two together. You hear the voice too, don't you?" Larry didn't respond, not at first. It felt like he was playing a tactical game of cards, and wasn't sure if he should reveal his hand. In the end, he did, and the two talked about their shared experiences. Dick, too, had been following the words of a voice, although he was never given a name. The voice assured him that he'd be able to help him in life. Larry shared that his experience was just as similar, and asked if he had his Walkman on him. Dick nodded, saying it's with him wherever he goes. Dick brought out the Walkman and handed it over to Larry. "Hold on, try the headphones. Tell me if the voice is the same." Larry did, sliding them over his ears, and his body felt hot as he slid his fingers over the play button. He pressed it and waited. He waited some more, and then the drum beat of the song kicked in, driving in the melody of the track. There wasn't any voice, just the song that was originally recorded on the tape. Larry excused himself from the table and left the diner, leaving a distraught Dick holding the Walkman and sitting alone with the two coffees. Larry was on the road faster than a jaguar in a jungle and slammed his own tape into his beat-up car's stereo. He turned on to I-87 and started driving north. "What do you really want, Cappy? You talking to Dick, too?" "Larry, I talk to many people." "You never said that. Not once." He slammed his fist on the steering wheel. "Why would I need to tell you that?" "I'm done, Cappy. I quit. I did everything you asked me to. I signed up for the army. I'm done." "You are far from done. You do not want your father's cancer to become terminal." "Cancer?" "Terrible thing, really. He was diagnosed on Christmas Eve of all times. Poor man is too proud to tell you, because it's a sign of weakness." "You're lying." "I have never lied to you, Larry." "You lied to me about talking to other people." "No, I did not. I did not think it was important that you know, so I did not tell you. I never lied about it, though." "It's basically the same thing." "It isn't, but wouldn't you rather worry about your father than argue pedantics?" Larry didn't have a response for Cappy. "I am growing tired of your attitude, Larry. If I'm going to continue being your guide, I need to know that you will listen to me when I give you advice." Larry gripped the wheel tighter and gritted his teeth. "What do you mean?" I need to see if you can follow directions. Larry, stop the car. What? Stop the car, Larry. I can't. We're on the highway. Larry groaned and pulled the car into the rightmost lane and slowed off to the emergency stop lane. What? What do you want me to do? We're going to exit your vehicle. We'll walk into the woods and strangle what you find. Whoa, what? Larry sat straight up like a lightning rod. What the fuck, Cappy? Time is ticking, Larry. You have 5 minutes to prove to me you're in this. The radio turned off. Larry heaved a sigh and rested his head on the steering wheel. He thought he was alone in the car, until he finally convinced himself to unbuckle and barrel out onto the highway, hurling himself over the railing and stumbling into the woods. He cursed and looked around in a panic as the mental timer continued to tick down. He finally saw what Cappy had in mind. He had no clue how Cappy knew he'd be there, but here it was. It was a stray dog, scrappier than most he'd seen. It looked about how he felt. Its back leg was bent at an odd angle. Looks like it was broken. The dog must have been here suffering for a long time because it no longer cried out. It only looked at Larry and thumped its tail weakly. In that moment, time seemed to stop and a world of indecision flowed inside him, like a whirlwind. Next, we're going to travel forward 7 years and return back to San Diego. 1997. Sirens. He thinks he's just heard an ambulance, such a familiar noise. He wanted it to come just a tiny bit closer. Devin is much older now, looking like he's in his mid-20s. Devin Captain, it'll read on the autopsy. His won't be the only one filed, not even close. Bonnie and Noah Marshall, Dante Ramsey, Craig Portsmouth, Sherry Chimes, plus several others whom he never met. He remembers. March 18th, 1997. It was a nice and breezy morning. He woke up feeling particularly energized. Alex was long gone. Their falling out was almost 10 years ago now, not long after his last memory of the mansion. Devin tried to reason with her, but she just wouldn't listen. He remembers getting angry. Really angry. He tried calling her every day. Nobody ever answered. He couldn't leave the mansion to look for her because he loved him. She left. He loved her. It was an impossible choice then to leave or to stay. He was sickened by that knowledge, knowing how stupid everything sounds, and yet he still made it. How could it have gotten so messed up? Time begins to rewind, the drool on his lips begin to resalivate and slowly climb back up into his mouth, and the life returns to his eyes. All goes backwards until the phone comes out, and everything resumes when you press the dial button. The phone begins ringing. He was alone in his bedroom in the lofty mansion, long upgraded from the shared room of years past. He was sweating profusely and pacing around with a large phone craned in the small of his neck, pressed up against his ear. At the beep, please leave your name. The automated voice froze up. Fuck! Alex, you stupid cunt, answer your goddamn phone! He calls out, breathing hard. I'm sorry. Look, I'm sorry for what I just said, but you need to answer. I know it's been a long time since we talked, but you need to pick up your goddamn phone. There's a silence as he reached his desk at the end of the room. Lying on top are 3 pills of varying shapes and sizes. Listen, if you won't pick up, I know you will eventually, I'm gonna start getting mad. I really fucking hate it when you ignore me. Gosh, I'm so sick of you when you do this, you know? No, he said to himself, putting the phone away from his ear. I'm sorry, Alex. I'm so fucked up. I'm in too deep. I don't know what to do. Is that what you want me to say? Do you want me to beg? I beg you to pick up your goddamn phone, because I need to talk to you. If you don't, then all of this will be your fault. The bell rings off in the distance. Once, twice, 3 times. He looks off through his window to the balcony in the center of the courtyard. Bonnie's figure is silhouetted by the moonlight behind her as she rings the bell. This was the signal that Noah had prepared for, the beginning of their ritual. Once the bell had rung 3 times, each of them would, from their own quarters, ingest the 3 separate pills and supposedly move on to the next life. This is all your fault, you fucking cunt. I did everything for you, and you threw it all away like it was nothing. After all this, I kept you present to me. You know the one. Consider this the end. I'm through. Fuck you. With that, he tosses the phone at the wall, smashes against it and falls to the floor in 2 pieces, and then picks up each pill and ingests. Now we're gonna move to 1999. Friedrich Adada is sentenced to death for his crimes at the Schroeder experiment in early January of 1999, and it is with his death that he returns to the dimension between dimensions to act as its overseer. And it's also at this point that the timeline splits. We will be focusing on the timeline I've entitled Apocalypse for the rest of this video, as is featured in the later chapters of Telos. But during this next explanation, I do want to slot in details from 2 novellas that I've never released that feature extra details during this time period. So when we get to them chronologically, I will fit them in and add the small details that I have to give you a little more context into this world. In 1999, Gavin Daniels is born in Athens, Ohio, on March 1st in 1999, to Gregory and Lorraine Daniels. In Aurora, Colorado, Andrew Kress is born on July 4th, 2003, to David and Elena Kress. Both children's parents work as freelance scientists for NASA. They are part of an elite and unique research sect that experiments on foreign materials discovered on missions throughout space and the otherwise unknown. There had always been rumors spreading of NASA finding life-changing materials on a more recent trip to the moon, the trip that had begun the installation of the Sustaining series of lunar bases set up for life and research up on the moon. These reports were misleading in truth, but they caught the attention of the Freeman's Word, a group of freelance journalists whose mission it was to combat corporation scandal and investigate private information holds as it spreads to among the public, a new age of yellow journalism. Brian Jackson, founder of the Freeman's Word, tasked Jean Armando, an associate of his, to research NASA and the evidence of the unit's creation to study extraterrestrial material. Jean begins her work undercover, applying as a bookkeeper to the organization's unit in Denver. Turns out they'd previously been holding office space under the name of the American Lung Association as to keep attention away from the work they've been doing. If anybody had any serious inquiries about the ALA, then the head manager would direct them to inquire about their Eastern Branch over in New York. They would then repeat the process and redirect them back to the Western Branch, and keep it going ad infinitum until the inquirer lost interest. Jean Armando was not one such inquirer to lose interest so easily, so after the initial redirect of the in-time secretary, Jean posted upon herself to remote hack into one of the building servers using a custom-rig computer to break into one of their secure networks. Inside, she discovers a plethora of encrypted information, much that looks to be way too complicated to belong to the servers of the American Lung Association. Jean's new discovery doesn't last long as the building shuts down in defense from the cyber attack. Her hack is countered as it locks her computer up, and subsequently begins displaying her location from the counter hack, unknown to Jean. She begins driving away from the building. She is sure that there are massive secrets being held by those that work in the Republic Plaza. She doesn't know why else they would need that level of security. As she continues to drive back to Colorado to San Francisco, she doesn't realize she's actually being tailed by hired guns from those that worked in the Republic Plaza. It turns out that those working there were an origin project of the idea of testing new chemical weapons in the depths of space, weapons that would be kept by the United States government as a trump card, should they ever want to formally give up their title as a democracy. It also turns out that the workers inside the building had been communicating with several war veterans who knew the high and low of weapon severity, and had used their information in accordance to their designs. These two are Gunther Ward and Leonard Stone. Once their security alarm sounds, they realize they are being attacked through one of their networks. They hop onto the action double time and shut out the attack. Confused as to how someone had broken through their signal, they trace the origins of the attack to a computer signal, most likely not natural. They run a counter-trace and begin searching out the one that had attempted the hack. Not wanting to risk the information of their work being leaked out and causing World War III, they send the veterans well armed to take care of the possible threat. And they're happy to oblige. Ward and Stone track Jean all the way back to San Francisco. It is here that they realize where Jean works. Ward signals his info in and receives a call back saying to torch the place. They do as they are instructed. Fire is set to the Freeman's Word, and it spreads quickly, unknown to the workers inside until it's too late. All but Brian Jackson perish in the fire. Brian manages to make it out alive with the fragments of the data he had pulled from Jean's computer. He realizes he's potentially in more danger than he could have ever believed, and begins packing up his things. This causes conflict at home, as Brian forces himself to keep quiet about the fire. He doesn't want them to know of the danger he could be in, and thus involve his family. He leaves without another word, keeping himself together as his wife screams at him from the inside. He knows that she'll take good care of their kids, while he goes on what could very well be a suicide mission, to spread the truth. Brian hops towns and frequents several smaller cities and towns surrounding San Francisco, posting bits and pieces of the data he found online anonymously, as to not give his location. He realizes it must be important, and someone must be on the lookout, because not long after he posts the information and specs on the chemical bomb, it'll be taken or hidden from public view. He changes up his angle and begins working his way over to 4chan, posting there, then moving on to Reddit, and then finally spreading it out over various popular internet boards. The news finally begins to gain traction. It begins receiving sub-mainstream coverage. Of course, the news has its share of doubters and naysayers, and it quickly becomes one of the most quickly debated topics on the underside of the internet. Turns out, back at the Republic Plaza, the workers who had been testing the chemical weapons have long since deserted their workstations. Both Leonard Stone and Gunther Ward are nowhere to be found, after a piece of cloth with their DNA is found at the scene of the Freeman's Ward building. The building is listed as in renovations, but no real changes are made to the layout of the interior. Instead, NASA buys out the building in the middle of August 2006 and designs a unit to research materials from space, what eventually ends up becoming the research lab for the Prometheans. Now I'm going to quickly talk about the first of the unreleased novellas. This is called The Promethean Tale. This story was going to dive deeper into the bonds between David Kress, Gregory Daniels, and Jay Ryan. These are all of the parents of the main characters of the first 3 Radical-9 Saga books, as they have known each other in their past. But we don't specifically ever learn about that past. This was going to be told through the first-person perspective through Jay Ryan. It includes important events from their lives, such as Jay meeting Karen Sanderson, his will-be wife, and it was also going to showcase the events that split up the 3 friends for 5 years, until they all eventually find a way to become part of the Radical-9 incident as freelance scientists under President Hal Valhart. And next we're going to make a detour to the second unreleased novella. This one's called The Burn Girl. This story takes place in Denver, Colorado in the year 2005. It is the backstory behind a previous inhabitants of the Republic Plaza, as we just described with Gunther Ward and Leonard Stone, who were under orders from Hal Valhart, and also of the girl who was burned alive and found by both the Prometheans and Gavin years later. The year is either 2005 going into 2006, and it was told from the perspective of a 16-year-old daughter of billionaire lawyer Oscar Gray, named Madeline. The story begins with news reports of tragic deaths. Maddie Gray's death is what causes the Freeman's Word to become interested in the activities of those in the Republic Plaza before the Prometheans. Madeline Gray is rich and a popular teenager. She hasn't ever had to worry about much in the way of school or money. Everything's been worked out for her. Her father's a lawyer and her mother's a banker, and she's also got a lot of friends. She's very friendly towards everyone she meets, not wanting her wealth to determine how others see her. She has a crush on a boy in her class, Seth Stone. Seth never gave her the time of day. He always seemed hip to hip with Maddie's best friend Jordan. Everything seemed to follow a sort of routine until out of the blue one day, Seth and Jordan get into a big fight. Seth accuses Jordan of cheating on him, and the two break up. The next morning, Seth begins to put the moves on Maddie, causing a rift in their friendship with Jordan. As Maddie goes along with it, the two go back and forth until Seth says she can meet up with him by the park in the main plaza later that night, not really asking. She nervously accepts the not invitation and can't stop thinking about it for the rest of the day. She gets a ride from her father, who chides her the whole way down to not go too fast with the boy. They both know what happens. Maddie doesn't date much because she gets attached too quickly. It really does become a problem, but she knows the only way she can get over it is by working through it, and that requires practice. It's near 8 o'clock, and Maddie has trouble finding Seth. She begins to get worried as she scolds herself for not getting his number. Out of the darkness, Seth appears and scares her, laughing. She tells him it's not funny, and he replies that it's hilarious. This is when he punches her stone cold in the face and falls to the ground. She thinks her nose is broken. Seth steps over her and says that was way too easy. Maddie tries to ask what is happening, but then she feels a sharp pain in her abdomen as a loud shot rings out. Seth's holding a gun. She sees a blood pooling around her and passes out. She awakens in a dark room. Voices in her head all scream out, but one in the real world keeps him there. Seth. Maddie asks him what's going on, and he says it's what needs to be done. Her parents are going to need to pay a lot of money to get her back, and depending on how long it takes will determine her condition. Seth bends down to her level, saying if things go smoothly, she'll be back home by the end of the day. She can accompany him to class on Monday. Maddie spits in his face, and his anger overcomes him. He smacks her across the face. Just then, Seth is shot in the shoulder, and he falls to a knee, screaming out. An older man comes out, magnum in hand. He tells Seth that no unnecessary harm must come to her, undeserved. They still need her as leverage. Seth nods and whimpers off, and now the man fully comes into the picture. He is Seth's father and a veteran of war, but turned hitman by a third party. He then takes out Maddie's phone, which he had taken from her when she was knocked out, and searches through it in front of her, finding the contact named Dad. He calls it once and then picks up almost immediately. Maddie screams out, and the man tells Maddie's father the terms of the ransom, $5 million. Now, this is as far as I got in the development of this story. Obviously, it never got written, and you can tell that Seth is the son of Leonard Stone. There was going to be much more fleshed out in sense of getting Gunter Ward, the rest of fleshing that out. But I'm sure with the end result, with her being burned alive, you can fill in some of the blanks from here. Now, let's return back to the story of the Prometheans and released stories. 2008. Gregory and Lorraine Daniels were split up due to the nature of their work. Lorraine was hired on as a project director on the Eastern Branch, located in the newly renovated Empire State Building in New York City, so that more work could be accomplished. This led to Gregory taking Gavin to Denver to live in an apartment while he worked with the Western Branch of scientists hired by NASA in 2007. Gregory is then handed the task of joining up with Jack Adata to research 2 new elements called lantrate and dicoberine 1 year later, promising a hefty paycheck in return. Gregory accepts. He wishes to have the money to give his son a good life, not realizing how dangerous these elements truly become. Jack had obtained the 2 elements from his father and rediscovers more of the elements on Mars when he orders his space crew to investigate in 2008. During an experiment, Jack accidentally burns Gregory's arm with sulfuric acid due to a mistake caused by his prosopagnosia. Gregory, alongside other scientists, Jay Ryan, Mason Radica, and David Kress, and Jack all begin to work to research the new elements under the name of the Prometheans. Gregory was promised a pay raise alongside the potential to do good for humanity to join up with the project, much like the others. The fact that they are assigned to the task of their jobs for almost all hours of the day, most of the Republic Plaza is renovated, so that the scientists can live within the lab for continuous work on the project. This includes their children. Mason's 16-year-old daughter, Kate Radica, is the one put in charge of looking and taking care of the other children while their parents are hard at work. This includes Gavin Daniels, Megan Adata, Andrew Kress, and Jennifer Adata. During the testing, it is discovered that both the lantrate and dicoberine cause a chemical reaction when combined with calcium and radium. Jack presses on with the testing after the qualms brought on by Jay, and it ends in catastrophe. There is an explosion that blows them all down. It isn't explosive enough to kill any of the 5 scientists in the room, but it does end up leaving anti-energy as a byproduct, except it is given another name in this timeline, Radical-9, after the names of the elements used to create it: radium, dicoberine, calcium, lantrate. The Radical-9 spreads through the air in a gaseous state. The 5 scientists become victims of Radical-9 poisoning. Jack experiences the largest amount of side effects considering his lineage and of being composed of anti-energy himself, and him being closest to the chemicals as they react. Radical-9 also spreads to the lower floors of the Republic Plaza. All of the scientists inside the Republic Plaza are poisoned by the Radical-9. In this timeline, Jack and the 4 other scientists are unable to contain the Radical-9 inside of the Republic Plaza. It slowly begins to leak out into the city of Denver. But it isn't until the Radical-9 in Jack's body begins to overwhelm him does it begin to do damage. Jack's human side does not mesh with the overload of Radical-9 in his system, so it causes an explosive reaction, destroying the Republic Plaza and the entire city of Denver. It is Jack's explosion that causes the Radical-9 outbreak within this timeline. The Radical-9 spreads out through the West Coast and into the Midlands, and on March 18, 2029, there are more explosions that go off in the Midlands of the United States, further spreading the poison further east. The East Coast is wholly poisoned by Radical-9 by 2030, and the people begin panicking, hiding themselves in bomb shelters as they begin to learn that it's the people that are infected with Radical-9 poisoning that explode once their bodies have had enough. Humanity realizes their impending doom on Earth, so they ship off Radical-9 survivors up to the Sistinio series of lunar installations that have been in development. They have limited time and fuel, so they can only reach the 10th base. On the rocket up is Gavin Daniels, Andrew Kress, Grace Jackson, Thomas Hadley, and Kate Radica. All but Gavin are being preserved in cryogenic stasis, as they each have a bit of Radical-9 poisoning within their systems. Gavin was chosen to oversee them as he was gauged to have the least amount in his system at the time of the decision. In 2042, there is an explosion which causes a chain reaction all throughout New York, Massachusetts, and several other East Coast states, which rips through America like wildfire. They arrive all the bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, multiplied by 10. The chain reaction rips the entire planet in two, and what are left rip it to tiny and tinier pieces in the coming years. For the next 18 years, Gavin tends the 4 bodies in cryostasis aboard the Sustenio 10 base. He has enough food and water to sustain an entire colony, so he doesn't need to worry about keeping himself alive. Luckily, the Radical-9 does not cause his body to explode, as it's gotten used to coexisting within the corruption in his system. Gavin wakes up every day to adjust the power cycles for the cryopods, to keep those inside at a consistent pressure within the machine. He uses magnetism to supercool the body and preserve essential brain function, but as each of the contained is different in both mass and composition, they need to be manually adjusted daily. This puts Gavin into a schedule of constantly tending to the preservation of those inside the pods. Gavin sees the Earth explode in 2042 from outside his bedroom window. The sight is unlike any he'd ever seen. The place he'd call home was utterly obliterated in front of his eyes. In the 2 years he'd been up there, he'd been fearful, but there was a tinge of hope in his system that there'd be another rocket up someday to wake up everyone and tell him he could go home. Now that Earth was destroyed, he had absolutely no chance of that happening. He and the 4 in the pods were the last humans surviving. This is where his demeanor begins to shift. He loses his grip on insanity, and continuously doubts whether he should let the others out of their pods or not. On one hand, he wouldn't have to be so terribly alone, and maybe they could have been in the process of procreating. On the other hand, what if their Radical-9 levels are too unstable? What if letting them out causes their bodies to blow up and kill them all? These are the questions that endlessly run through Gavin's mind for the next 18 years. It is what causes his hesitation. In 2060, Gavin is approached by Jack Adata, seemingly from out of nowhere, just after he finishes daily calibration of the cryopods. Turns out this is a Jack Adata from another timeline entirely. He's actually come to offer a proposition to Gavin. He tells him the existence of the multiverse, and the possibility of him being able to go home. A different, but similar home. Gavin reacts just how Jack wants him to. It's clear Gavin of this universe has lost his mind, but Jack knows exactly which buttons to press to convince him to work alongside him. Jack tells Gavin of the horrible nature of humankind, how he shouldn't bother keeping up with those survivors alive. It wasn't like humankind left him in any better state. Gavin's thoughts become more vicious, and he entertains the thought of growing stronger, ditching behind the identity of Gavin Daniels and instead taking up the moniker as Micah. Micah asks Jack of his plan, and he says, like his counterpart in this universe, he'd been overloaded with Radical-9. He'd managed to avoid the fate in this timeline by stroke of luck that turned to be the way of how Radical-9 had spread. He absorbed much less into his body than the version from this timeline, and didn't immediately explode. His problem, though, is he was still hit with a large chunk of it, so his body is actually decaying at an alarming rate. The plan is to set up a suitable host for him to take over, as his poisoning had enhanced his mind several times over, more than a normal human's, and he has the ability to hijack the brainwaves of another and insert his mind alongside it, taking control. Micah asks why he needs his help if he can just take over someone's mind. Jack says he loses all connections with his old body when he does it, so he only has a single chance. He'd be giving up his body and all the effects of the Radical-9 with it, both the good and the bad. So he needs to get into one that has approximately the same power, if not greater, with not as many drawbacks. He needs Micah's help in staging an event called the NATO's game. It is going to bring the Gavin Daniels from his timeline into play, and Jack is going to try to hijack his mind. Specifically him, because he has already had some Radical-9 in his system, but not enough to be catastrophic in Jack's case, as that's why Micah is not in the cryopods with the other survivors. So, if Jack takes over, he'll have full control over Gavin's body and his subsequent abilities. Jack also explains that the NATO's game is going to be a simulated death game, something created to bring out Gavin's full powers so that once Jack takes over, he'll be at full capacity. Explains this is necessary because the human body's inner fight-or-flight mechanism is in conjunction with Radical-9, reorganizes the body system around like a theoretical slot machine. They can trigger that response over a long period of time that can get the desired traits to rise out of Gavin like a spiritual sort of energy. Jack describes the leftover automaton research that Mason Radica had left unfinished in his timeline, and now he plans on utilizing the research to create an army of automatons. He leaves the actual development up to Micah, while Jack sets up the first Natos game, but he waits until the first automaton is completed, the one made in the vein of Jack's first daughter, Megan Adada. Once the Megan Adada automaton is completed, Jack travels back with it to his timeline, leaving Mika to resume work on the constructing of the automatons just as Jack had shown him. This causes the cryopods to be ignored, and due to mismanagement, all 4 survivors die as the supercooling goes too far and stops their hearts completely. It isn't until a few months later that Jack returns with news to bring about an automaton, and quick. Gavin's consciousness has left his body and began an interdimensional travel. By Jack himself going before, he carved a path that Gavin's consciousness will take to this timeline. Out of the numbers of automatons that Micah had created, he'd assembled a few in his own image, one even of him when he was younger, mainly out of his remembrance. Brings it out, and the dimensional tear opens as his consciousness comes through, still whole and held together with the Radical-9 mixed in as pure anti-energy. It is bonded with his existence. Gavin wakes up in control of the automaton created in his likeness. Unbeknownst to him at the time, he wakes up with other automatons in a docking bay of the Sestenio 10 base. The other automatons he wakes up with are the ones in likenesses of Thomas Hadley, Grace Jackson, Jean Armando, Andrew Kress, and Kate Radica. It is here that the events of the Natos Game 2 unfold after the reported failure of the original Natos game. The game concludes with Gavin learning the identity of the one who had gathered him, Micah, and learning that his mind has been transplanted in that of an automaton, and his original body has actually gone nuclear back in the other timeline, making ruins out of Dever once again. Michael tells him that he is the consciousness 41 years in the future, which isn't totally false. Micah plays on Gavin's insecurities and pleads for him to help save their world, his world. To do so, he needs to continue to develop his ability to jump into other universes. This ability is called jumping, but it is more accurately projecting your consciousness throughout the multiverse. Micah shows Gavin a project he had waiting in the wings. He calls it ICARUS, which stands for the Infinity Core Amplifier of Research Under the Sun, a collective stream of consciousness containing a database of memories of the survivors. Micah tells Gavin it had been built in case of an emergency with the 4 in the cryopods. The truth is, he'd actually constructed memories along with several automatons to program artificial consciousness within them to reflect those they were created after. Gavin begins to explore each of the survivors' memories as he begins to learn more about the circumstances surrounding his own powers. Seeing that he is developing, Jack intervenes in the situation and confronts Gavin personally, and reveals Micah's betrayal to Gavin's surprise. Jack tells him that he must continue with looking back into the past. Gavin believes it so he can learn the full story. Jack threatens to kill the survivors if he doesn't cooperate, and so Gavin agrees. Unfortunately, though, these survivors have all long since been dead. Gavin's powers fully develop, and he discovers his ability to explore the depths of the multiverse throughout the dimension between dimensions. Through this ability, he sees Micah conversing with Jack, and Jack revealing his plan of what he intends to do with Gavin once he comes back to the Sestenio base, which is, of course, to hijack his mind and take control of his body. Jack gives Micah a mission to search out a child he only calls the Dreamer. Gavin witnesses Jack's ability to create anti-energy from his body, which he's been self-generating. He fuses the anti-energy into Micah's body to raise the power of his augmentations to unforeseen levels. His DNA begins to change, and he begins to grow more feral. He grows a couple feet taller and broader, hair growing all over his body, and becoming more wolf-like in appearance. He becomes the first ever Lephia, a feral creature that is created when humans become overexposed to anti-energy. This term will not go on to be used in any of the released novels, but is instead a concept that will be talked about as we bring up information from my unreleased novel, Habit Unto Instinct. Micah opens a dimensional rift and travels through it to the new timeline in search of John Ryan, the Dreamer himself. Gavin realizes he has to do something, and he has to save the 4 survivors and get them out of Jack's hands. He returns to the Sestenio base and confronts Jack. He's severely outmatched as Jack begins to suffocate him using telekinesis, throws him against the wall, and then shows Gavin that the 4 survivors aren't actually survivors, and have actually been dead this whole time. He demonstrates on the cryopod that contains Andrew Kress, crushing the metal until his blood spills through the spheres. Gavin freaks out and lashes toward Jack, his emotions surging his abilities. It carries them both into the new timeline. Humanity is completely wiped out in the apocalypse timeline at this point. Earth is destroyed. All other existence ceases to have meaning, as humans aren't there to observe it. The universe ends. And that's where we're going to leave it for now. The next time we'll be heading back to 1999 to observe the timeline our ferocious jagged data really begins to prosper and grow into the villain that we see him here as. We'll be tackling the front stories of the 3 novels that begin the saga, Radical-9, Telos, and Dreamer, and we'll be right in line to follow up with the stories in the time after that of the George family and Cappy, as well as Devin Campton and Alex Sharp. If you like this, you can check out my novels for free over on my Royal Road page, linked in the description. I have also downloadable ebook copies for sale over on my Ko-fi, and finally paperback and hardcover physical books over on Amazon. With that, check you guys next time.